talk because I have so many questions for these gentlemen. But I guess we were starting to talk a little bit in the green room, and everyone knows. Maybe you should just introduce yourselves. Okay.
I'm Ian Biederman. Created Shark in the time.
Shark.
Brannon, Braga, worked on the Star Trek franchise for a number of years.
I'm Damon Lindelof. I co-created Lost.
Peter Casey co-created Wings and Frasier.
Shawn Ryan created The Shield, and I executive produced The Unit.
This is why I'm excited. So I guess what I wanted to just start talking about, I'm going to get real practical, and we will talk about everything, but I really just wanted to just jump it off by going, I was talking back there about, right now I'm writing a movie, and it's a nightmare. And, I miss TV on a lot of levels, but one of the things I miss about it is being plugged in to a very short writing process. And I was thinking about TV in terms of time. We're telling a story over time, but we have a very short time in which to actually get out our script and then get out another one, etc. What does that mean to you guys? How has that affected you creatively? Or do you think about that a lot? Just the process of, like Damon, we were talking backstage about, or back there about, or let's just talk about when you first were getting, approached by, because you were approached by the network, correct?
Yeah, well, to answer the third part of your question, the pilot process is actually, completely antithetical to the way that a TV show is run, because you start kind of pitching your idea in the summer, and then they say, we like this, go write an outline. Suffice to say, you don't really have to hand anything in until, Thanksgiving, and then they notes it, and then you have 3 or 4 more weeks to execute their notes, and they decide what they're going to pick up over, the Christmas holidays, and then you come back and you have, essentially 2 or 3 months to cast it and shoot it and all that stuff. And then when you're actually in production on a television show, you're doing all of that in 8 days, or 8 to 10 day cycles. Everybody up here is, you probably have produced maybe as many as 32 or 34 episodes a year. But
No, thankfully 24.
24 is the most.
That's enough.
It's uncanny, but so you have all this time, to do a pilot. We on Lost, fortunately, it was a baptism by fire out of the gate, because Lloyd Braun, who ran ABC, said, I want to do a show about a plane that crashes on an island. We've tried developing this several times. We've written scripts. Do you guys want to take a crack at this? And he partnered J.J. Abrams up with me, and we had never met. We met on a Monday afternoon. 4 days later, we handed them sort of like a 25-page outline of, here's a version of the pilot that we could do. And this was all happening in the first week of February. And he said, okay, I'm greenlighting the outline. And we were in production 3.5 weeks later, and handed him the 2-hour posted finale 7 weeks after that. So, we went down to Hawaii, we brought a plane with us, we cast 14 series regulars, it was a whole thing. So, for us, it was kind of like, oh, this is going to be the pace at which the show is done. But I think, it is still a mere, and having worked on procedural shows prior to that, Crossing Jordan with actually Ian, and before that Nash Bridges, which was a cop show, just the pace of it all is, I still, if you look at it and go, how am I going to do this, then it never happens. You just kind of have to say, I'm doing it.
Right. It's better not to look.
Right. That's the moral of the story.
Who has? I'm interested in Shawn. When you had your pilot of Shield, did you have thoughts go through your mind no, this isn't what a network is doing now, or did you have did you get that kind of feedback from an agent, or what happened with Shield?
Well, I was supposed to write a sitcom pilot.
Good job. Yeah.
and I do believe there are some laughs in that pilot. I was supposed to write a sitcom pilot, and after banding around ideas for 7 months, we still hadn't agreed on an idea. And the deal was about to be up, and I wasn't going to have given them a script, that they had paid for. And so finally, one day, Lisa Berger, who was running the company then, sort of said, well, what would you like to write? And I, like Damon, also came out of the Nash Bridges camp and, had worked for Carlton there and was used to the sort of cop format and just decided I wanted to try to write a cop show that I would like to watch. And I wrote this thing, and I assumed no one would ever make it. I thought the only place that could make it was HBO, but HBO usually developed their own things, and this wasn't being developed with them. So I just knew it would never get made. So it kind of gave me this freedom to write sort of whatever I wanted and whatever felt right and interesting to me, and I didn't have to worry about how sellable it was or anything, because no one would make it. And I was such a low-level writer that it was no big deal that I would have written a pilot that wouldn't have gotten made. It was just not a problem at all. And then when FX came to the picture and decided they wanted to do it, then all of a sudden it wasn't quite as harrowing as Damon's experience on his pilot. There, we did have more time to sort of figure it out. But all of a sudden your life changes from that moment that you have the script and you think, okay, this is what it is, and now I don't have to worry about it. Okay, we're going to make it. For someone like me, it just all came crashing down.
In the sense that you, all right. What's that? Let's try to talk about that moment for a second, because in other words, are you saying because it's no longer theoretical, and how are you going to actually sustain the telling of this story over time? Or are you talking even about, I'm in charge of now a small army of people who are all looking up at me with hopeful eyes, or
right. All of it. You take on a lot of different jobs, and some of which I was never prepared for. I had spent very little time in editing rooms, and all of a sudden I had to be in charge of how the show would look like after editing. I'd never hired people. I had been the person being hired on a television show, and all of a sudden I'm hiring a person in charge of post-production. I'm hiring a casting director. I'm going into I'm hiring actors, which I would give my recommendations to Carlton or Joss Whedon, who I worked for a year, but they would be the ones to make those decisions. So all of a sudden you go from being a person who has an opinion, and when you're just a person with an opinion, you're never wrong, because it doesn't have to be enacted. so you never have to test yourself to see whether it would work. To all of a sudden you're giving hundreds of opinions that are going to be enacted upon, and any one of them could sink your pilot. The wrong actor could sink your pilot.
Right.
Choosing the wrong person to run post, choosing the wrong casting director, choosing the wrong producer, all of those could sink your pilot. And you need all of them to line up in a way for you to make the pilot work. It's amazing that pilot turned out so incredible, considering the circumstances that you guys were working under.
Peter, you were nodding your head a lot. Do you identify with that?
No, I just have this. I do agree with a lot of that. The way Frasier came about was we were working on Wings, and Paramount approached us because we had worked with Kelsey on Cheers, and Cheers was coming to an end, and they said, Kelsey's interested in working with you guys again, and would you be interested in doing a pilot, a series around Kelsey? And we said yes. And when we spoke with Kelsey, he wasn't interested in pursuing Frasier, the character of Frasier. He wanted to do something different, and we felt the same way, because we just thought, it's it's death to try and compare yourself to Cheers. It was just such a great show. So we came up with an idea that was completely different. He was going to play this character who was a magazine mogul a la Malcolm Forbes, and he had like Malcolm Forbes was a motorcycle enthusiast and had an accident and was paralyzed from the waist down and had to run his empire from his penthouse in Manhattan, and from the bed, and
That's like me. That's what I do.
It seemed brilliant at the time, right up until the point where the guy from Paramount said, "Are you fucking out of your mind?" And they said, "No, you're going to do Frasier." And we said, "Well, sorry guys, but Kelsey doesn't want to do Frasier." And about half hour later, they called and they said, "Yeah, Kelsey wants to do Frasier." And so we said, "Okay." And so then it was for us the key was, how, if we're going to continue this character, how do we sort of forge our own, identity with this?
Right.
And so what we tried to do is every opportunity we could, we tried to make the show look different from Cheers. I mean, we the first thing we did is we got to get out of Boston, so we moved him to Seattle, with the idea that this makes it very hard for the network to insist that we do a crossover. You know, it's hard to bring people all the way across the country. You know, you need a good excuse, even though they're
They found
mythical.
some excuses.
Well, they did, but we figured with Lilith it was fine because they were, you know, they had been married, so we figured that's organic. We can get away with one a year. That kind of helps. But I know that if we had kept it in Boston the first season, we would have had 6 or 7 with the Cheers people. And how do you, if you do that, how do you forge your own identity? People keep going, oh, gee, I miss Cheers, you know. So we changed that. We didn't do musical, you know, little stings between the scenes. We didn't do exterior shots like Cheers. We substituted the cards with the, you know, the sayings to go in between scenes. We just tried to do everything we could to make the show look as different as we could so that we wouldn't be compared to Cheers, because we thought we'd probably suffer horribly in that comparison. So that's kind of the way we approached it, doing this. And then the time frame was actually, it took us a whole year to do Wings, mostly because there wasn't a lot of time pressure on us to sort of develop it. And also I have to say, when you're starting with nothing, it's very hard to get that first step. We kept going, well, do we create characters and then, you know, pick a character and then build a show around that character and put it someplace, or do we pick up a forum, you know, a setting for this, and then populate it with characters? And it was a chicken or the egg, and we couldn't quite figure
But isn't
out.
that the quintessential pilot writer's question? It seems to me that that's all I've ever thought about when I was, or one of the many millions of obsessive thoughts I've had trying to write a pilot, is where do I start
and understand,
with
we were
this?
frozen for about 4 months on that one.
Right.
We just,
Right.
you know, and so, but with Frasier, because Cheers was ending and because they wanted to sort of, you know, make sure we premiered the fall after after Cheers ended, it forced us to do things much quicker. And ultimately, I was glad to have that time frame.
And again, you're talking about time frame, and that's what I've come to realize in my dotage that I love about television, which is that it's like getting on that speeding train and you hang on. And Brannon, just talk about element. Peter was talking about he had sort of a philosophy, or you had sort of a belief of what your show needed to be. What does that say to you? Is that something you went in with, a sort of credo that, for instance, if you had younger writers coming in under you, that you could imbue to them, this is the identity, this is our show? Or are you finding that or both?
It's both. Yeah, you go in with the best of intentions of all the great things your show's going to be, and about 3 weeks later, you have no idea what you're doing. But you're also relying on the writers for that as well. I mean,
Right.
the reason you put a staff together is to hopefully people are going to come in and help facilitate whatever vision you have.
Well, talk to me about, and to us about putting a staff together. I mean, what's the biggest challenge for you in that, or is that too limiting a question? How does that happen for you?
Well, for me, I can't speak for everybody here, but I assume it's similar. You will probably, you've got to have a good staff. You can't write all the episodes yourself, though sometimes you do. Sometimes out of 22 or 20, we did 26 a year. I would end up writing 13, 14 or more. But
Would you be writing
those were on the bad
stories
years,
that other
but-
people had broken, or
yeah,
would you?
or sometimes. But usually what you try to do is you try to put together a core staff of people who are really going to help you break stories, write scripts, and that's usually going to be people you know initially and can trust and rely on, that you've worked with before, at least for me.
Right.
I don't know about you guys, but
People are nodding, I think.
Again.
There's two, you know, the thing is to kind of generalize it in any way. I've been on, you know, on different kinds of staffs. I was on 2 staffs before, you know, Lost came around, and you know, and basically I think there's sort of one form of thinking, which is, you know, what I, you know, sort of, it's more like the bike racing mentality, like the Lance Armstrong is like, nobody knows that Lance Armstrong is actually a part of a team. The reason that he is able to win all these Tour de France's is because he has these guys who are trained to basically ride in front of him, pick off other players, and create drafts, so that he doesn't have to work as hard. But all you know about is Lance Armstrong and the drugs. Yeah, yes, exactly. That actually makes the metaphor play even better.
Suddenly it's real.
Yes, exactly. No, but I think that's a misperception, because it's like one of the things that my perception of Alias prior to me teaming up with JJ was that JJ Abrams wrote every episode of Alias, because I was a fanboy, and it's like, of course not. You come in and there's this amazing staff, and JJ is directing some, and if you're directing, there's no effing way you can write at the same time. The reality is these shows are all, multi-voiced, and especially on our show, which basically has 14 series regulars, there are writers who basically take a shine to different characters on the show, and that actually, if it were just sort of in my brain or Carlton's brain, we'd just be writing Jack and Locke all the time, and, it doesn't mean that we don't like the other characters, but that's kind of the drive of the storytelling for us, and it's always kind of like, it's important for people to go like, well, what's going on with Claire and the baby, or, listen, what's Hurley doing this week? And we're like, well, Hurley's kind of the comic relief. It's hard for him to generate a story. And then they go, well, what if he finds a van in the middle of the jungle? And we go, oh, what if it's the van that we're going to find 10 episodes from now, and that's the van that, sorry, I'm about to spoil something if it's on your TiVo, but that Ben found his, killed his father in, and then, then an idea comes together for a nice, funny Hurley story, which is actually a setup for something horrible that's coming down the road, but never, ever in a billion years wouldn't have happened if Eddie Kitsis and Adam Horowitz hadn't pitched that story. And I think, the magic happens in the room as a result of all these separate voices and ideas, and, it's not at all like Lance Armstrong, Running Up the Hill. I know a lot gets written about Carlton and I because, we're kind of out front and doing podcasts and all that stuff. But, if you look at, we write maybe 5 episodes a year out of 24 hours. And yes, as showrunners, you do a fair amount of rewriting, and, we're involved in the story breaking, but it's totally a group process. And I think the show would be shitty without it.
Now and you're absolutely right. You have a good staff. It's putting a staff together
Yes.
is not always easy, because sometimes
process.
it's a process.
It took us 3 seasons to get to that. Yes, the
Right.
first season was an entirely different story, and I don't, I'd be curious for the people on the panel, what was your, especially Ian, who's just finished the first season of his show, what is the turnover? Because
Yeah.
for us, like, we lost 80% of our staff
Well,
after season
that
one.
happened to us
Yeah.
every year. We had every year it was, as soon as somebody's contracts were coming up, boom, they were being offered other shows or pilot deals.
Oh,
or
so they were
whatever.
poached. So you
They're
didn't,
totally
you weren't.
poached.
Good ones are poached, and
Yeah, I was gonna say,
yeah.
Damon,
Yeah.
were all of yours poached, or were some of them excess?
Yeah.
Well,
I use poached in a different way.
Depoached.
I mean,
Yes,
there
you
Yes,
are
I like to poach a few.
there are young aspiring writers here and other aspiring writers here. So, and there's writers here. So, what would somebody be doing or not doing that would be most likely to get them, that you would want them out? Can I just ask?
Well, for me, the most important thing at the end of the day is the script, the quality of your scripts. You can be great it's just my opinion. You can be great in the room in story meetings, and you can have a great personality,
Right.
and be fun to be around and contribute in other ways. But for me, it's got to be on the page at the end of the day. When you hand that script in, can you write the show? Can you rewrite the show? Can you help me take a script and rewrite it? Can you? To me, that's the bottom line. But you guys may completely disagree.
I do disagree, actually.
Interesting.
I would just say, and it's just a different way of doing it. Somebody needs to get a script to a certain level, but if they can get to the point where I can spend 3 hours with a blue pen and get it to where it needs to be, I'm fine. What's most important to me is what they provide in the room. Is what's that next great story idea, especially on the 2 shows I work on where we're always trying to be different. I'm always stressing I want to see something that we haven't seen on other shows, and those are by far the hardest ideas to come up with. We're not just sort of saying, well, what's our version of Die Hard this week? What's our version, of Beverly Hills Cop this week? So we're always trying to do something completely new, and those stories are always hard. If someone can give me a script that I think is okay to good, even if it's not great, I feel like I and some of the other writers can get there. But if somebody provides the idea that episode spawned from that we wouldn't have come up with otherwise, and it's
Right.
just great, that's what I feel is the most important thing.
And I agree, and I think Also, I think you have different expectation levels, at least I do, depending on where people are in the pecking order of a staff. You know, if somebody comes on, it's their first job, and they work really hard and they're really smart and they're in their room and they're doing everything they can possibly do to make, essentially, it sounds bad, but to make my life easier, which is what, you know, when I was a staffer and I came all the way up for 8 or 9 years before I created my own show. You know, I knew the one thing I knew, and I wasn't always the best person on staff or whatever, but I did know that my job was to try to make the people who run the show's life easier. And that means contributing in any way I possibly could, moving the ball up the hill, you know, moving the rock. That's what it comes down to when you're making a movie every 8 days. So, and I have different expectations for a staff writer than I do from a supervising producer or for a co-executive producer. Not only do they cost different things, but they have different experience levels. And every year I expect everyone to get a little bit better, including me, especially me. So, you know,
Well, I've never worked on a drama, so I don't know what the room is like.
Do you want to?
Believe me, I've
Come
written
to
some
the
Frasier
dark
scripts that
side.
were like dramas, but no, I mean the room in a comedy show is it's very immediate. You get a run through of the show every day, and then at the end of the run through, the writers go back to the writers' room and they rewrite the script. So the script gets rewritten 4 times during the week, and you want to see people that can be constantly giving you fresh jokes, great stuff, and then before the run-throughs, the staff is gathering there doing what you guys, I'm sure, do in your room, which is we're just sitting there trying to break stories, and you're looking for people who can come up with fresh ideas, and you know, I will give you an example of what not to do in a room, and that is there was a writing team that we had on the show that when we were in our rewrites, and we would be going through the rewrite, and we would, let's say we're on page 25 and we're trying to work on something that's not working on 25, and they go, back on page 12. and that was a constant. It was just constantly, and we, you know, very politely for a while, we were saying, well, listen, when we are on page 12 would be a good time to bring that up. And then at the end of the season, we weren't so polite, and we just said, you know what, this isn't working.
Exactly.
Because you're
Back
just...
on April 15th?
Yeah, there's yes. Yeah. We're pushing the rock up, and you're pushing it back down. So that's, yeah.
I want to talk about, since it's come up a little bit, is this idea of getting ideas, and obviously this is what we're all obsessed with when we have our show on the air, is like what's going to happen, and when is it going to happen, and how are we going to tell this story through time. Shawn, you've been really, I think, how do I say it, remarkable in doing very strong gutsy moves. So have you. I mean, obviously everybody here, when you get ideas and you make a big plot statement, do you get scared? Do you get scared that what am I going to do with this new twist?
Yeah, we had, you know, at the end of season 5, we had Shane Killam on our show, and that was, and it felt like completely the right story thing to do at that point. But knowing that we had 23 more episodes to go before we were going to end the series, and we were going to drive a wedge between 2 of your main characters on the show, Vic and Shane, you know, what stories are you going to tell? Because you've gotten used to, doing your show a certain way, and you know it works this way. We knew that we could always send a strike team out onto the street and sort of, you know, knock heads around and, you know, and sort of bring the bad guys to justice, and we could do that well, and it could be fun, but I'd seen that a lot. And so now I want something different, but you don't know whether you can do that different thing as well as you were doing the previous thing. And so you take a leap of faith and you get a little scared, and that's when, you know, and the time pressures are on. But that always put me in the head of Vic. That when I'm sort of in unsettled territory, then I can write Vic in unsettled territory. And when I have to write a script in 2 days, I can write Vic, you know, having to juggle all these balls at the last minute. So I try to use all those things and try to put it on the page. But it does get scary.
I feel, though, what's interesting about that, just to get back to the, you know, as a fan of The Shield, I think that in the DNA of the pilot, you basically sort of said, here are the rules of my show. And the way that you chose to end your pilot, which was against the rules of pretty much every cop show that I'd ever seen. I was shocked legitimately shocked. I think they're shocked where you're like, it's shocked for shock's sake, and then you're shocked where you're like, if anybody watched The Sopranos last week, you're like, and I think this was the good kind of shock where I was like, okay, Vic is going to be the hero of this show after he just, I thought this IA guy was going to be the hero of this show. Like, there's no way that I'm supposed to ever care about this guy. And so if you're watching The Shield, you have to know that's what you signed up for. So, I find that the terror that I had in the early seasons of the show has been replaced by, listen, my show has to do this. Like, it's not even my choice. We have to be bold and surprise people, and sometimes the surprise is not being surprised or whatever. But by the very nature of this is not a franchise drama. It lives and dies by its ability to defy expectations. So, for one of the things that we say is kind of the worst idea is the best idea. And, you never know where it's going to come from.
Wait,
But
explain that. That
an
sounds
editing
really
process
good.
happens in your head as a writer where you go like, I just had the worst idea in the world and I'm not going to tell anybody about it.
Right.
But what makes it so fucking terrible is also what makes it great, which is that idea sort of might be outside the realm of anything that feels safe to you.
Right.
And then, that's the beauty of The Room is you suddenly have this sounding board to basically say like, all right, I just had this terrible idea, and you can immediately see instantly, what its
I was
effect
right.
is. Yes.
Oh.
That's right. boy, was it.
Ooh.
Well, sometimes it is a terrible idea, but it sparks just a little twist from a different writer that makes that story work. And so people are always asking who came up with some idea.
Right.
And I think back and I realize, well, really, it was a bad idea from one person
Right.
that got twisted this way, that I twisted a different way, and then somebody else put the cherry on top. And whose idea is that? It's
Right.
the show's idea. It's the room's idea.
Brannon, do you identify with that in the end?
I just have bad ideas.
And you embrace them. We deal with it all the time. I mean, on our show, we have James Wood's character as a sort of an edgy, prosecutor, and he used to be a defense attorney. And it's like the question always, and with any anti-hero, and you guys have created them too, is how far do you take this person? Before, not like will people root for them or not, but can people relate to them? At what point does somebody become opaque? And I think as a writer, you try to, even if somebody does things that are bad, hopefully you can still invest in those things, and you understand, well, because we've all done bad things, especially you. But like, we've all done bad things and we're not proud of it, but it doesn't make us less human. But I think there are ways to go too far with a character, and when we're writing our Sebastian character, our last episode of the year, he essentially frames a serial killer. He completely constructs a crime that never happened to put this guy away. And, he's a serial killer, and on one level, that's a great thing. And on another level, you're like, well, he's a prosecutor, and I'm not sure they should be making crimes out of whole cloth and, prosecuting for them. And there was a huge debate for days that raged in the room about whether this was going too far. Are we, plus the name of the show is Shark, so you're waiting for the jump the shark headline always. It's built in. It's like, is this the one where, like, the clever guy from Variety thinks he's the first guy who thought of it? Yeah, So we always have it in mind. But it's an ongoing tension, but you got to push it. You got to get pretty close to that all the time, because you know what? There's 22 of them, and if you stay in the same place, the show will just die.
You can't stay in the same place, but also I know I have this fear, recurrent fear, when I work in TV of I'm going to do too much too soon and blow my. You're nodding, Peter.
No, I'm nodding again. I gotta get one of those Halo things. It's just sits like this. Okay, here's where we're gonna.
You're nodding off.
No, but look at the Daphne Niles thing was something that wasn't necessarily planned by us. In fact, take that. It wasn't planned by us. In fact, Niles and Daphne didn't even meet each other until the third episode of the series, of the first season, and we just were looking for something interesting in that first meeting of the two of them, and we thought, oh, wouldn't it be funny if Niles was sort of smitten with her? And so we wrote that, and oh, gee, that was pretty good, and so we started kind of making that a bit between them, whenever her back was turned, he'd smell her hair, all of those kind of things, and it suddenly became this, very drawn out thing, and we actually had it go on for 7 years. Who knew it was going to go on for the first 7 seasons? But frankly, by the time we got to the end of the 7th season, you felt like you had, you had sort of been cutting this loaf of bread, and now you're down, and the slices are getting paper thin. I mean, how many other ways could you cover that? So we finally had to abandon it. I don't think we abandoned it necessarily because we wanted to. It's just that you kind of felt we've covered every possible way we could do this.
Right, you just knew it in your gut.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting. There's an interesting panel in itself, just talking about things that happen in the series that were never intended in the
Yeah.
pilot.
Let's talk about that.
There are many examples of it. I think I don't know why the one that pops to mind is Family Ties, which was supposed to be about the parents.
The hippie parents, yeah.
And this one character took off, or Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show. I'm dating myself now. But there are many examples of that, and this is about pilot writing. When you're just writing the pilot, again, you have all of these things you think the show is going to be that you're putting into the pilot, but the truth is, you never really know
Right.
exactly what's going to catch fire and creatively. Be it
Right.
an actor, a storyline, whatever.
Well, let's talk about actors, since you brought it up, and I actually wanted to talk about that, because I think that's a lot of the...
May I just add
Oh,
one thing?
sure.
When we wrote the pilot of Frasier, it was really a story about a father and a son reconnecting who had this, terrible relationship.
Right.
And yet, just in that, very shortly, in the first few episodes, we realized, hey, we've got gold here with Frasier and Niles. And that was our opinion. Now, I'm sure you guys know this when you create a series, is that you write the pilot, you go into production, you do 5 or 6 episodes before the pilot airs. And so you're in that sort of netherworld of going, this seems to be working, but I have no idea if the audience is going to take to it. And if they don't, we're kind of in trouble in our first 5 episodes. But it wasn't long before we really started realizing our money was in Frasier and Niles, and let's move to that relationship. And we obviously kept the relationship with his dad, as a viable part of the show. But that's really where it went. And I was told a long time ago, and I think it's very good advice, don't you steer the series, let it find its way, and then go to those things that work. And that's how we ended up the way we did.
Right, and that's a lot about actors and acting,
Mhm.
because that's the magic that happens with chemical, combustion. I mean, David Hyde Pierce is a certain person that nobody had really, I think. I mean, I'm not saying he never worked before, but there he was. Nobody really knew about
Right.
him, and he was enchanting, kind of,
Right.
and you couldn't
Can't
stop
ignore that.
Yeah, and that was a big deal. I mean, you have so many actors. I'm in awe of that, and how you wrangled how do you deal with, like, for instance, if they're missing from episodes, or they're, do you have to deal with their worries and their terror? And
That was always the biggest challenge, at first, and basically kind of pitching back to the network and the studio, hey, we need to have kind of 14 series regulars on tap. And they're like, why do they have to be regulars? Can't you put them on recurs? And it's like, you could, but then you're going to get hosed later, because one of the recurs is going to pop. And when that happens and you don't have a deal in place, you're going to get completely screwed. Like, they didn't want Jan and Son, Sawyer, not Hurley. None of it was like, you can have 6 series regulars and everyone else will put on like arc deals. And it's like, they're not leaving this island. If they leave this island, the show's not called Lost anymore. So therefore, the only way to get people off the show is to kill them. And if you kill them too rapidly, people won't invest in them. Like, so ultimately, we've got to create a huge core cast, which created a tremendous, sort of casting rush, especially since we were now casting the show after all the other pilots were cast. It was literally like we were left with everybody who did not make it. So it became sort of a dirty dozen of casting, and that's where I give almost all of I was there in the casting sessions, and and a couple of the ideas were mine, and I obviously kind of knew when things were working, but that's JJ's real genius is, you look at like, Kerry Russell or, Jennifer Garner, and you're like, where did these people come from? Both of those actresses had been working a lot before they became, Felicity and Sydney Bristow, respectively. So it was like Josh Holloway was an underwear model who had just gotten his real estate license in it, played Vampire number 6 on Buffy was his big credit. And it's like, you look at that guy, he's 35 years old, and you're like, where was this guy? It's not like the Clooney phenomenon where, again, Clooney had been working and working and working, and then he found the right vehicle. And it felt like that story was like every one of our actors, from Naveen Andrews to Jorge Garcia, who was a regular on Becker, Harold Perrineau, who they were all working with the exception of Evangeline and Josh, really, and just kind of taking them and sort of developing the synergy. And then, as you say, the only complaint in season 1 for them was like, I want to put me in, coach. Like, I want to play more basketball. But as they began to realize, hey, wait a minute, I'm living in Hawaii. Like, everybody really digs the show. And kind of like, don't I want people coming up to me all the time and saying, I wish you were on the show more, as opposed to, yeah, they kind of go to the Hurley card a little bit, I'm kind of getting sick of you. So it actually creates this great appetite for every character. This season, for example, Matthew Fox's character wasn't in at all 4 episodes, and maybe averages around 4 or 5 scenes an episode. If he does a flashback episode, which we did 2 of this year, it feels like he's weighted more heavily, but he's the kind of theoretical lead of the show. And when we did sort of a comparison, Juliet, who's a new character on the show, and has been in twice as many scenes as Matthew Fox, just over the course of the season. And it's an alchemy that if you sat down and tried to plan it that way, you'd go crazy. It just occurs. But I think, obviously, Shawn has a big ensemble, sort of with a singular lead. It's always Vic that you kind of see. But if you watch the show, on a screen time level, I'm not so sure that he has significantly more screen time than many of the other actors on the show.
Yeah. No, and
You said at the beginning, Shawn, I'd never been, I'd never had to make casting decisions, and suddenly you're thrown into this deep end of the pool. What was that like, casting The Shield?
well, I relied on 2 other people greatly: Clark Johnson, who directed the pilot and who was an actor himself, from Homicide, and he had really great actor instincts. And then Scott Brazil, who was our producer on the show, who we sadly lost last year. He passed away from ALS, but on the pilot, he was really experienced, and so I just took the attitude. There's something I know. What I know is this script. I know this pilot script, and I know what I want the final result to be. But I haven't done a lot of cooking. I haven't mixed the ingredients. I know what I want it to finally taste like. And so I'm going to communicate to Clark and to Scott what it is that I want. And I'm going to rely a lot on their judgment. And then you have your own instincts when certain actors came in. When Michael came in to audition for Vic, there was really something that was sort of undeniably working about his audition, especially compared to a lot of the other people who auditioned for it. So knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses is really important. So I looked at that casting process as a learning experience. Why did Clark like this person? Why did Scott not like that person that I liked? I liked this sort of surfacey thing, but Scott could see beyond that surface thing and sort of see to episode 6 or 7 and how that person wasn't going to give you anything more than what they were giving there. And Clark would sort of see something deeper in a person that I didn't see at first, and he would have the person come back in and sort of do it again, and I could start to see it. So casting's really tough, and just because you may have written a great script, why does that mean you know how to cast? Just because you write a script, why does that mean you know how to edit? Just because you've written a script, why does that mean you know how to hire people? And
Yeah,
give them
you know.
directions.
It puts you in a tough position, because ultimately it's your thing, especially in the pilot process. And as you said, you wrote the script. Nobody knows it sort of inherently better than you. But like when I was doing my pilot, James Woods is starring in it and Spike Lee is directing it. So, it's like, and I am very low on the very technical timing, but bottom line, nobody knew the script better than I did. And so, when Spike Lee and I found ourselves screaming at each other, like at the top of our lungs on some woman's rented front lawn in Brentwood, it was like that I had to make the decision at that moment. It was like, you know what? I wrote this scene, I envisioned this scene, I know what it is, and I have to stand up for it.
Timing, it's instinct, right?
And a lot of times over the course of the series, these actors will sort of, the characters will turn into the actors, and the actors will turn into the characters. And I assume this is true, but I read about your pilot that you were sort of just seeing actors without roles written, and you were sort of, you'd see Jorge and say that's a guy we want on the show, so let's write a character like that. Is that
That was
how that would work?
That was
Because
exactly it.
because I think that's just brilliant.
You know, when the show started, you know, we really did, you know, we were like, Jack is going to be a doctor, and, you know, and Kate is going to be a fugitive, and Sawyer's going to be a con man, and Locke's going to be somewhat mystical. And, you know, and that's kind of where it began, and we started casting that core of characters, and then Yoonjin Kim came in and read for Kate, because we were not, you know, we were not specific as this guy's a white guy, this guy's 50 years old. It was like, bring in everybody. So we were reading, you know, Korean actors, African-American actors for Jack, Latino actors for Sawyer, like whoever popped, that's what it was going to be. And also internationally, so because they're all on a plane from Sydney to LA. So Yoonjin Kim read for Kate, and we loved her. And we were looking at her at the back of her resume, and there were all these movies in Korea, and she has a flawless American accent. So you don't assume someone was born in Korea or the United States or whatever. So we said, do you live in Korea? Do you live in the States? What's the story? And she said, I used to live in Korea. You know, to be honest with you, I'm a big movie star in Korea, which we would never know. This movie here was the effing Titanic of Korea. Thanks for asking. And we were like, well, this is a huge. Suddenly, the idea was, okay, she should just be a character on the show. She shouldn't be Kate the fugitive. Mm-hmm. She should be Sun, the Korean housewife who actually speaks English secretly, and that created the need for Sun and Jin, which were not in the outline. So then, as soon as she left the room, JJ and I called the network and said, we need 2 new regulars. And they're like, wait a minute, we just got really excited about this actress, and they're like, okay, that's 1 new regular. Well, no, she has to be married. She has to have this guy. And then they're like, okay, you can have 2 new. And then that night, Curb Your Enthusiasm was on, and Jorge sells drugs to Larry Davis.
On that.
And we're like, that guy's got to be on the show. They're like, what do you mean that guy? Who does he play? And we're like, we'll call him, I don't know, Hurley. He'll be funny. Like, everybody, you have to watch this scene. Everybody loves that guy. So, it's sort of, because there was no script, we sort of were able to kind of say, we're going to begin to populate this world with incredibly interesting actors, and we got very lucky.
This is something that I love hearing about, and it just inspires me so much. I mean, the times that I've worked on TV, I feel like I get into a zone that's almost mystical, to use that word, where everything that's crossing my path is like telling me what I can put in the script, and I'm looking at things and I'm going, oh, I can use that, and it's just like coming to me from everywhere. And I think it's the speed with which you are supposed to, with which you need to get out the next piece of material, that you sort of need to just grab, synchronistically what's going on around you. And do other people experience that?
Well, that's kind of what happened with David Hyde Pierce too.
Right.
When we were creating the show, we did not have the character of Niles, the brother. It was going to be the dad and Frasier. And our assistant casting director, Sheila Guthrie, came in one day with the 8x10 of David Hyde Pierce and said, doesn't he look like Kelsey did like 10 years ago? And we said, yeah, he does. And we said, is he any good? And she said, yeah, I mean, if you're thinking of a brother, this guy would be really good. And so we said, any tape? And he had been on this show, The Powers That Be, that Norman Lear had done. We looked at the tape. We said, this guy's brilliant. And so we set up a meeting with David. And in the meantime, we just started trying to think, okay, let's give him something. I mean, try to think of some kind of character. And we just said, you're Frasier's brother. You're a psychiatrist. You're like Frasier would have been if he had never walked into Cheers. And what do you think? And David said, I get stopped on the street in New York all the time with people asking me if I'm Kelsey Grammer's brother. And he said, I'm up for it. And that's kind of how that came to be.
Right.
And on Wings with Thomas Hayden Church, he came in to read for the part of Brian. And we said, he's not right for Brian, but I've never seen anybody like this before, so let's create a character for him. So we created the character of Lowell for him.
Can I ask you an interesting question, though, back on the story front? When you were like, should Frasier have a brother, did it ever occur to you, okay, he's been on Cheers for God knows how many years and talks very personally about his life, and we've experienced this whole relationship that he had with Lilith, and never once mentioned his brother Niles. Yet, and they're so close. Did you ever think the audience won't buy it? They won't buy that he had a brother. It's retroactive continuity. Or were you just like, this is a whole new show, it doesn't matter?
A lot of it was that, and frankly, we when we had left to do Wings, we hadn't been paying much attention to Cheers, and it wasn't until after we did the pilot that we found out that at one point he had said, "My dad died." And we'd actually shot that. We'd written the pilot. Kelsey had read it a number of times, and then he came in one day and said, I seem to recall an episode where he said, "My father died." I said, "Now you tell us?" And so,
You were lying.
He was lying to get sympathy.
And so what we ended up doing was the first time Ted Danson did a guest appearance on Frasier, we asked, we said, let's write it in, and we said, Frasier or Sam says to Frasier, "I thought you said your father died," and Martin looks at Frasier, and Frasier said, "Well, you'd really made me angry, and I just did it." So I mean, we were trying to. It's like we're going through the forest with a branch kind of covering our trail.
Look over there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, if you pay attention to this. So I mean, a lot of times we just they saw Cheers a half an hour a week. There's a lot of time that perhaps he mentioned it to Lilith the rest of the time. So yeah, we kind of made our own reality.
And this is, particularly pertinent to you, not to Shanghai them up, but I'm fascinated by this because we're really experiencing this thing now because our show is serialized, and a show like 24 is serialized, but it can reset every year. We're more like the Harry Potter books where, every season is literally built upon the foundation of the season that precedes it, and you become a slave to canon. And as a writer, the more you think about canon, the more restricted you are. And I'm just curious, sort of in the Trek verse.
Yeah, I was going to ask him.
It must have been stifling to kind of say, it would be so cool if we could do this, and then to have some Yahoo come in and say, no, you cannot do that. The Romulans were not seen by the Federation.
Those were Damon's emails, by the way.
Exactly. That was me. And they weren't seen by the Federation.
Well, it's true. We were dying to do the Romulans, but in the originals, you never actually see one. And we were doing this prequel to the original series, and so we had all these wacky ideas, like, well, the Romulans could be wearing helmets. You don't see their face. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And this is all ridiculous, but you have to be, when you get an obsessive fan base, which is a good thing, you have to be true
Honor
to
it.
what you've done. There are cases where I have broken mild continuity things, thinking it was for the better of the show. It would better the show. It's better to get a great story and break. But boy, was that a mistake.
So do you
It's tough because
actually?
they feel like they know the show better than you do,
They
and it's
feel-
like
They
you're
do.
like,
They
but
do,
I,
frankly.
know the show.
you should have a, but it was my idea card that you can play. You're referring to canon that in an episode that I wrote of Next Generation 4 years ago, and I'm choosing to ignore it. So if I choose to ignore it, then you should be okay with it.
Yeah, but that doesn't fly.
Of course
does it?
not.
No. I mean, has
Well,
that
it's,
been?
it's their show too. I mean,
Yeah.
you make the
Right.
show, but suddenly it's everybody's show, and they do have a certain entitlement to the show creatively, and it really is. It's a symbiotic relationship with your audience that you're feeling full blown right now.
I don't know how it is with you guys too, but at Cheers we used to feel completely handcuffed by the Charles brothers because you'd come up with the story and they go, "Well, that was like on The Odd Couple." They go, "Odd Couple? For God's sakes, how many?" It's like, give me a break. How many stories are there out there? But they were very, very strict about that. Sorry, honeymooners.
But it is valid in that those shows were still close in their mind, and in terms of the comedy world, and in the cop show world, you mentioned you did not want to repeat rhythms or dynamics that have been done recently.
Well, you try, you can't avoid it. And nothing will
Yeah.
drive me more crazy than to think you have a story that you've never seen before, and then 3 weeks before you air, Law and Order: Criminal Intent does a version of
that
it,
happens,
and you're
too.
just like, ah. Yeah, but it's very hard, and I tend to be like, Glenn and Les were a little bit, in that I just watched a ton of TV as a kid, and I've seen every Hill Street Blues, I've seen every LA Law, I've seen every NYPD Blue, I've seen every homicide, and I have a very good memory for them, and I've torpedoed so many stories from my writers based on I saw Pembleton do that in Homicide, so no.
Right.
And it does drive them crazy.
It does. I know. But then what you try to do is you just try to find something to tweak it just a little. bit.
30-degree tweak,
Yeah, is
and
enough,
you're
yeah.
good.
Should I open
30
this
degree
up to other people? Should I let other people ask questions? Go.
You sound unsure.
Go. Yeah. Oh.
At a certain point, when you have a like very strong characters, like who, when you're dealing with an actor who, knows the character very well, and like who wins?
Depends on the actor.
Is he a
depends on
movie
the
star or
writer,
not? If he's James Woods, you try to go for 500. You try to go 1 and 2, and it's like you have to trust them. They're, you created it, but they embody it. And if it's not a synergy between you and the actor, then you're not doing your job right.
It's, there's this. You probably know this because you've worked with him, but there's a Mammoth story that probably never happened, but it's some very. I've heard it 9 different ways, like all great urban legends. But essentially, he's like putting up Glengarry Glen Ross, and like Kevin Spacey comes up to him and says, "The rehearsal went great, the read-through went great. I have one question for you. There's something I don't think my character would say." And Mamet goes, "Where is it? Where in the script?" And he says, "Oh, great. It's on page 85." And they flip through, and then Mamet goes, "No, he says it." And I'm always like, that's the greatest story for any writer. But I always wonder, when actors tell that story, they probably tell the part where the story now continues. Because the reality is like, it's a great touche moment, but the reality is you now have to do another episode with Kevin Spacey.
Right.
I thought a cool version of that is a David Chase answer, which is who says it's your character.
Right.
Which I thought was a really cool thing. There was a
As long as you get a laugh on that.
Yeah, ultimately you don't want to make enemies of the actors, and I find it's very helpful to. It was helpful in my case in that these actors that we got on the Shield really wanted to do the Shield, and because 85% of the town didn't want to audition for that show because FX was nothing, everyone assumed it wouldn't succeed, the whole thing. So the actors that we got really wanted to do it, and I was able to have a level of respect from them from the beginning. But if you set rules, and the rules that I always set were, my job is to get you scripts early enough to read it and to study it and to know it before we start filming. And at that point, if you have questions about the script, by all means, call the writer of the episode, call me, let's talk about it. But once the cameras start rolling, you're going to say what's on the script. And you will have an opportunity to address what's in the script before that. And if you're going to be too lazy to read the script until the night before you start filming, then you're going to be locked into doing that. And then I also have a writer on set so that if there's just something that's not working in that scene or the location's a little bit different and a line needs to change, that writer is sort of authorized to do it. But I don't, because I've heard some stories about David too, Mr. Mamet, about, he says what it is, but it doesn't quite work as well on TV, and you want to make them feel like they are partners in your creative enterprise. They do look at the scripts from the perspective of their character, whereas we tend to look at it as the whole, and so they will find things that are worthy of changing, but I try to get them the scripts early enough that they can, that they can be partners in that, and then let's not have these conversations, while the cameras are sitting idle.
Right. I identify with that. Let's go.
We can't hear you, so you better have it.
Well, they're recording this, so it's for everybody who's going to watch it one day.
Exactly.
In our last panel, the executives were really saying how they love you guys and they work so hard to get your shows on and they care. They're just as passionate about the shows as you are. And then Peter's saying how sometimes it takes like 5 episodes to really find your way and what's going to happen. And yet every show that I love seems to get knocked off after one showing of it. What is happening that some of these shows are being knocked off after 1 or 2 episodes? They don't even get a chance to find their audience. I mean, rumors have it that if Friends and Seinfeld had today's executives, that they would never
Friends
be.
and I can't speak about Friends at all, but Seinfeld was only left on by a clerical error. I mean, there was, it's famously known that Seinfeld, first of all, had the worst focus group scores in the history of time, and Seinfeld was, they were sort of casting about in NBC. The same people that bragged about it a year later were casting about what else could we have? What else could we have? And they didn't have anything, so they just left it on, out of just without, because they didn't know what else to do at that moment. And in the time that they left it on by accident, the show, because it was an acquired taste in a different kind of sitcom, the show slowly, not to cut you off, but built an audience. So I just want to say that all that focus group stuff, historically, if people will bother to look, almost every, we talked about Hill Street Blues, we talked about almost every groundbreaking type show or show that does a twist on something doesn't do well focus group wise, and sometimes does in the toilet focus group wise, because people are so taken back by it and unclear what it is. I don't know if you guys have had experiences with
But
that.
I, you know, not to be combative, but I disagree with the central thesis but you look at a show like Friday Night Lights, which is back. It's coming back. That show has no business being back. And in fact, I can almost guarantee you it will never make money for NBC. You can't sell it internationally because it's about football. It barely cracks a 2 rating in the demo, yet they're sticking by it. And the reason is because it's really good. And, you know, and I feel like for every Friday Night Lights that they will pick up, that means that 4 shows that probably eventually might have found an audience or have gotten their footing later, you know, will fall by the wayside for it. But the short answer is because it's a business. The reality is especially now, it's like saying there's an approach to the TV business that is now mirroring the feature business, which is if you don't open, you know, if you don't have a big opening weekend, your movie will never make any money. There's no such thing as a sleeper TV show. Because the fact that people were referring to Seinfeld as the model for a sleeper TV show, that was 12 years ago that it became a sleeper TV show.
True.
What show sort of in modern contemporary television viewing had a very small audience at the beginning and then gradually that audience began to build? In fact, you're actually seeing the opposite. My show, for example, you know, had a huge audience at the beginning and is slowly but surely beginning to atrophy viewers. Whether or not that's because it's serialized and it becomes too complicated, or we're writing worse than we were before, or people are TiVoing more, who knows? But, you know, you try to bring as large of an audience at a show's inception, and then gradually it's very, very hard to build because there's so many options. So, you know, I think while you're right in some cases, those guys, you know, in order to keep Friday Night Lights on the air, which is a quality show, they have to sacrifice, you know, other shows sort of at the altar of, you know, the business model. Because GE is making these decisions, you know, and the Walt Disney shareholders are making these decisions, and Westinghouse. So it's like they're corporations, you know, unfortunately. Sorry to.
Did I cut you off? Did you have more to your question?
It was more along the lines of, is there something that a writer can do to defend themselves, or are there other mediums that they should be looking at, like with
You
the
can
internet
arm
and things like
yourself,
that?
but you can get arrested. There isn't too much. I don't think there's too much you
That
can
made
do
a lot
about
of
it,
sense.
except
No.
make the very best show you possibly can, and you know, don't aim your show, you know, toward what you think is going to work, because it's not going to work 9 times out of 10. You make the very best show you can. You hope you get. Then there's be 10 million things that control whether you come back or don't come back. You couldn't possibly control your time slot, what else they're going to develop, you know, what Winnie was saying about what they have and what they don't have at the time. There's a few networks now that are like, you know what, we'll stick with it because the cost now of production is so high to make new pilots that, you know what, hell with it. It's on, it's cool, it's got a somewhat kind of a demographic, whatever it is, we'll throw it on there, see maybe it'll catch fire, which is better than it was, I think, 5 years ago where it was like 2 and out. You know, I think it's gotten a little bit better, but as Damon said, it's a business, it's a very tough business, and you know, Friday Night Lights is an exception to the rule.
The worst
Very
place
rare.
to be, I found as a writer, is when your show premieres and it doesn't do too well, and you still have to make 13 more.
Yeah.
Because the network and the studio begin to question everything you're doing and try to find ways to make the show better, rather than, and
Yeah.
it becomes really a very difficult situation to be in.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's changed is that, because you talked about Seinfeld, I've watched some of those early episodes of Seinfeld, and the first 8-10 episodes of Seinfeld are not that great.
Right.
And so it wasn't that the audience in the country caught up to it. I think that the shows got better. I think starting probably with that Chinese restaurant episode, they finally figured out what the show was, and they turned into it. And they just happened to be on the air long enough to figure it out. I think the one thing that's changed now is you have to know episode 1 what your show is.
That's right.
Right.
And you've got to be able to nail it from episode 1, because you're not just going to sort of be there hanging out for 10 episodes long enough for you to figure it out.
They actually ask you to give them episode 10. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, in many ways, like, you know, it's kind of they for us they ask for a Bible, you know.
And they ask you that morning,
Yeah.
and,
Okay,
and the
so-
meeting's at 3.
Although they used to pay for a Bible, and now they ask you for these
But-
ideas
but
for
when
free,
you-
which is a guild issue I have.
But when
But,
you gave wait, what was that?
Well, they used to pay these creators of these shows to write a Bible for what's the show going to be beyond there. Now, and this is an issue that, as a member of the negotiating committee of the Guild, I want to get into in this upcoming negotiation. Now, when you make a pilot, I just helped 2 of my Shield writers with an ABC pilot, and when we got the schedule, it was, okay, May 2nd, you're turning in your cut, and you'll also be turning in your document about what the show is going to be in the future and future episodes and what's going to happen with the characters. Well, they're not compensating anyone for that. It seems to suddenly have been rolled into
a lot of work,
your
too.
pilot fee, and it's a ton of work.
And it's a huge risk when you're in that sort of
Yeah,
position.
so that's
And you're generating it
Right.
at the worst of possible times
that's right.
because it's like we want you to lock the pilot at the
Right.
same time
Right.
we want you to
You're
generate.
cutting and you're dead.
Yes.
You're dead by
yes.
that time.
And then they're not compensating for you on top of it. It's just an issue that I have that not many people have talked about. It's just another way that the companies are kind of squeezing more and
The
more.
executives
from
really
us.
do love us,
Yes.
just like they say.
No, but they're like so and so is doing. You're like I don't want to write a Bible for you, and they're like, oh really? Because the guy who wrote the other pilot is doing it gratis with a smile on his face, and
Exactly.
if he can convince us that he has a show beyond just a pilot. We're going to give, we're only picking up 4 dramas this year, so we respect your integrity, but,
We love you.
Right, exactly.
I'm not saying we shouldn't
You know
do
what?
it.
You'd be really good on his
Yeah,
show.
no, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but they should pay us for it. They
Oh,
should.
yeah.
They should pay for that.
They should pay.
I have a question, and this is mostly for the guys who do the serialized shows, but for everyone. When you go into your first season, do you know how the season's going to end? Just how much of the overall arc of the season do you know going into it, and how does that gel with the idea that you're saying that there's a chemistry and it takes on a life of its own? And even what you're saying right now about you've got to say where it's going to be in year 3, but I'll stick with my first question, which is just how much of where the story is going for the season do you know going into the season?
On the Shield, I had a pretty good idea, and I compare it to a road trip across the country. That you want to end up in California, but you have the freedom to say, well, do I want to go to the Grand Canyon or do I want to go see Yosemite along the way? Those are decisions that are made along the way. I know I'm heading west. I know there's a location that I want to get to. I know what day I want to get there, and yet I allow myself the freedom to. If I run into a friend, I stop there and spend some time with a friend. If I'm supposed to be a friend but I don't like it, I'm gonna leave early. So on the Shield, I had a pretty good idea of where we were gonna end, and then I hired writers and we figured a lot about the trip in the middle.
Nice analogy.
Yeah, for us, now I feel like my analogy has got to be good. It's like a basketball.
Make it a cross-country killing spree.
Cross-country killing spree. You know that you want to kill. No, the basketball. I mean, basically at the beginning of each season, we kind of mini camp and we sit down with the writers for 3 weeks and we just do straight story work. It's usually while we're posting the finale for the previous season. We just finished doing it now for season 4 of the show. And basically, you come up with, here are all the things we want to do, and we want to do this roughly by episode 5, and this roughly by episode 9, and then this is going to be the season finale of next year. And you come up with all sorts of ideas, and then you actually get into the writing of the show, and some of them you completely abandon, some of them you embrace. But I think whereas, someone like J.K. Rowling can basically say, I'm going to write exactly the Harry Potter story I want to, because I'm a writer, and she just writes it, and it doesn't matter if, Daniel Radcliffe gets a DUI. It's an analogy.
Production issues.
Yeah, and budget is huge. I mean, the thing is, we have these massive ideas. It's like,
Right.
We knew this season, for example, like that a submarine was going to be incorporated in our storytelling. But then, basically it's like, oh yeah, we can get a sub. It's going to cost like $11.5 million, but we're going to own it and we can use it whenever we want. It's like, do we need it that badly? But we still need to kind of, and then you begin to change your plan around so that you can still have the sub, but you make it shootable. And then some actors pop, some actors don't. So, in season 2, we basically introduced Michelle Rodriguez's character to be sort of a love interest, to create a little bit of a triangle between some of our other actors, and she just didn't play it that way. In fact, as soon as we introduced her, the audience's perception of her was, we love to hate her, she's a villain. So you start writing to that, and Juliet this year, again, we introduced a character to be a love interest. That time it worked huge. So we started writing that up. So you have to kind of say, the road trip analogy, if it rains, maybe you're not going to do as much driving as you did that day. You have to be able to improvise to some degree. And the fans of the show get very disappointed when they hear that there's any degree of improvisation. They want to know that every step is meticulously planned out. And you never change your mind about anything.
Some of the best ideas come out of the improv.
Almost all of them, actually.
Yeah, we had, just as an example, we had what I felt was one of our best episodes of season 5, the Forrest Whitaker season on The Shield, came about because I was in editing looking at episode 3 of The Shield, and we had a line that had been scripted in where Ronnie had done some research on this guy and talked about how he was divorced, and yet in a later scene I saw that Forrest Whitaker was wearing a wedding ring. And I was like, he's wearing let me see that. Is he wearing his wedding ring? Has he been wearing it the whole time? And we looked back, and he'd been wearing a wedding ring the entire time, yet we had this very important thing talking about how he was divorced. And I was just like so depressed that we screwed up this production thing. And I went back to the writer's room. I was like, we really fucked this thing up. It's just awful. And, how can people not notice? And I was like, okay, well, why would a guy who's divorced be wearing a wedding ring? And we came up with this whole story about how he hadn't let his ex-wife go, and she shows up. And we made a whole episode out of it, not that different than you talking about how, apparently Fraser's dad was dead, but you find a way to get a joke out of it. Right. In this case, we found an episode to get out of it, and that's just complete improvisation.
Right, and that's what I have to say. I love that about television production. I mean, that just exactly what you said is what I love the most.
Well, that comes back to the time issue that you started with. It's like sometimes, you know what? It's an 8-day movie. And on Tuesday the next one starts, so you gotta find a creative way to do it that has some integrity but also has a lot of efficiency, and just and then you gotta start over again, and you gotta sort of forget about it and go on, which is the sort of the blessing and the curse of it.
Right. There's this little question that someone gave me, but I didn't quite almost know what to do with it. But do you read certain agency scripts first? I guess that's a fair question. Do you read certain agencies' scripts first?
I'll read my agent's scripts first, but I don't necessarily pick, I'll do my agent a favor first.
If I like an agent, or I think there's an agent who has good taste and who doesn't send 50 scripts but sends 3, because these are the 3 people I think at the level and at the that fit into the voice of what you do. I'll read those first because you have those agents are very important to the process, and they can really save you a lot of time and really help you out.
Also depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for higher level producer writers, they may not be represented by a smaller agency. Depends on what you're looking for.
Right, good answer. What do you think, Damon?
I think the same thing. I mean, the reality is I like working with agents that I feel know me, and know what my certain personal. So when they call and say, I think you're going to love this woman, she's really smart, she's not a sci-fi, writer, but she wrote this great, spec of Rescue Me, and I know that you like that show, and I'm like, oh, this is good, because this agent actually kind of knows me. We met, we had drinks once, I told him what I was watching, he processed it, so now I feel more comfortable that he is actually sort of, giving me a tailored suit as opposed to something off the rack. So it's, for me, it doesn't matter where the agent, what agency the agent is. It's more about who they are and them selling to me specifically. I feel like it's more of we're not dealing with catalogs now. It's sort of a direct interaction.
Right. Where are we at time-wise? Can someone just tell me?
15 minutes.
Oh, great. Okay, you. This young woman over here. Yeah, blonde woman.
Thank you. This is so great. Would you ask them to, or would you speak, please, about staffing? And about what you read for new writers. Do you read specs or plays or pilots? Your sources.
What do you like to read?
I like to read original stuff, but I don't like to read features because that's too long for me. So I love to read spec pilots, or if I hired a couple writers on The Shield who'd written a pilot for HBO that didn't go, but I read that pilot. And I like to read specs, but if they're not shows that I don't know well, it's hard. But it doesn't have to be a direct match to your show. I hired Kurt Sutter on The Shield off of West Wing that he wrote. You wouldn't think there'd be a lot of crossover, but you get something. Can they nail those characters? I knew those characters well because I love that show. So, I'll read it. I've read plays. I've read short stories even.
I've done all that. Short stories are, that's.
Now, what about comedy? I've always wondered, because I started off trying to be a comedy writer, and people like him would never hire me. And I always felt like I had great stories in my specs, but I felt like there were probably funnier writers, and I always suspected that when you were looking for staff writers and story editors, that you wanted funny. What are you looking for in a sitcom script? Because you've got the edit.
Funny is big because no, I mean when I read spec scripts, I usually like to read scripts of shows that I like. Now, unfortunately for the poor writer out there, they have no idea what show I particularly like. But I mean, when freelance writers would ask me, well, what kind of spec script should we write? I'd usually tell them, look at the Emmy-nominated shows. I mean, look at the shows that are really well-respected out there, the Seinfelds, or the Friends, or Roseanne, or Simpsons, or something like that, that you go, this is smart humor. It's good smart humor, and those are the ones that I would read, and it did mean a lot to get it to laugh at the script. Frankly, I had so many, there would be stacks of these things. I'd usually give it 10 pages, and if I didn't get a laugh in 10 pages, I just don't have the time to sit there and go, that was a great joke on 42. I just don't, it's unfortunate, but I always would tell prospective writers or freelancers who wanted to write spec scripts, don't hold off your good stuff. Get it in there right away so that you grab the.
I tell myself that today. I tell myself that. I mean, that's one of my little mantras. It's like, don't hold back. It's like,
don't need a drum roll. Give me the symbol
wait.
right away.
Don't wait. Let it be good right on this page.
Right.
Yeah.
I like to read two things. I like to read an hour spec of something that's somewhat relevant to what we're doing, which in my case is a legal drama, or any kind of procedure. You can, a cop procedure will be fine as long as there's enough procedure in there to see that you're comfortable with twists and turns and plotting and stuff like that. And also like an hour pilot. I think sometimes younger writers are intimidated about writing their own pilot, and I think that's a mistake. I think because you can do stuff with your own hour pilot that shows you understand the format, but also brings your voice to it. Which is really what I'm interested in, especially like the lower I go, somebody who really has a distinct individual voice.
I actually look forward to reading original pilots.
Me too.
More than I do.
I agree.
Like a West Wing, though it's obviously very important to see that skill set. I actually always look forward to seeing what somebody's written.
Yeah, you don't have all that pressure, like, oh my God, am I getting like the president's voice right? This is your voice, and that's the most important thing. And it also has the beauty of being able to show that beginning, middle, and 4-act structure. You know how to write a scene.
It's good advice though to have both.
Yeah.
It's good advice to have your arsenal of samples.
I was just going to say one thing I think that we probably would all agree on too. And if you're writing a spec script for a show that's already on the air, give the great material to your star. Don't bring in that super guest appearance that you go, I don't know who this character is, but they've got all the material here.
I've gotten Star Trek scripts where they've written themselves as a character.
And why doesn't that surprise me?
I thought it was a good idea.
Hey, whatever. Sorry.
At least it was outside the box.
Exactly.
It worked out best for both of us. For me, and this is kind of slightly heretical, I agree kind of with what everybody said, but I don't like to read samples at all. Carlton, who basically, he hired me, he hired Shawn, he hired, several other people who went on to, be fairly successful. As sort of, I trust his instincts more. For me, it's more about, my assumption is if you've got a representative, if you have jobs on your resume, you can write. So I'm much more interested in the meeting. And I think that's something that nobody ever talks about. I always get asked, what sample should I write? How am I going to... But but for me, it's like you live and die in the meeting, and so many writers do not know how to take a meeting at all. It's like it's actually
But that presupposes that you as a showrunner know how to have that meeting. Like
Yes.
I am the worst person in the world. Like I chat. Like, so where are you from? Like these idiotic things, and that doesn't help anything, which is why I rely so much on the text. Like you probably are very smart. I mean,
What do they do wrong?
Yeah, say.
What are you looking for that maybe they're not providing in the meeting?
In my opinion, I think that for me, the meeting is really about, do I want to hang out with you like 12 hours a day? You've made the meeting, you're in the meeting because, I know that you dig the show and you know that I dig your writing and that, this feels like it could be a good match. But a meeting is just like a date that a friend set you up on. It's like, hey, I think you two would be good together. It's like, I've explained him to you and I've explained her to you and, or him to you. And however it works, you're now in a room together and it's kind of like, are we going to get along? And I feel like, obviously there's a nervousness factor and it happens kind of on both sides. And it's a horribly shitty position for a writer to be in because you've just come out of a room where there's like two other people who you're kind of trying to chit chat with, but you know that they're up for the same job as you are. And it's sort of an inherently, nervous scenario, and I can't give advice on how to give the meeting other than, you're selling you. You've got to kind of be you, and I want to hear about like what interests you. I don't want to hear about what you think about my show yet. I want to hear about what other shows you're watching, and I want to hear your story. Like, where do you come from? Like, I'm not your strength, but at the same time, it's like, what are you going to bring to the staff that we don't already have?
What's in your brain?
Yeah, exactly. What's in your brain and what's your sensibility? Because if you say, "Hey, I'm from New Jersey, just like you, and I, and I'm Jewish, just like you, and I watch your show," I'm kind of like, "Hey, I'm already here. What the hell do I need you for?" In fact, I'm a little threatened by you because you're much more attractive. So, that's my 2 cents.
If I can tell a real quick story about what happened once at Frasier, we brought this writer in for a meeting. We'd read his material, and it was certainly good enough to meet that writer. And he came in, and look, taking meetings is very difficult, and you never quite know what the tone you should take and have. But this guy came in, and after my two partners and I got a chance to say hello to him, from that moment on, he never gave us a chance to say a thing. He just started talking about everything, about his life, about his career, about this, what he thinks about that. He's going on and on. I swear to God, at the 45-minute mark, I said, "Will you excuse me? I have to go to the bathroom." I went out. I went to our secretary, and I said, "Jeff, I'm going to go back in that room. You wait for 2 minutes. You call in. You tell us there's a major problem on the stage, and we got to go." And so went back in. Phone rings. I didn't answer it. Let my partner answer it. There's a major problem. He was great acting. He didn't know he was acting. He goes, "Oh, we got a problem with Kelsey on the stage. I'm sorry, we got to go." "Oh, okay." And the guy goes, "Okay, thanks." He leaves. And the guy started out, and I go, "Whoa." I go, "That was to get rid of him. That's all. That was all." And you know what? From that moment on, we put that guy's last name on the phone message thing. And whenever we had a meeting we had to get out of, I pressed the star button and it put his name up in my secretary's room, and he would call in 2 minutes with a problem. And that's how you got out of it.
So don't do that.
So don't do that. You got to know when to kind of close it. It's like acting. It's like leave them wanting a little more.
No, it really is on some level. It's like acting, but I totally agree with. I want to know what's in your brain, but it's also I want to feel like you're giving. Well, I guess those are the same things.
Yeah, I mean, that guy told me I couldn't take 12 hours in a room with you. That's what he basically told me in that meeting.
You can't listen.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
If you can't listen, you can't be in the room.
Right.
You're not going to be on staff. 'Cause the
Right.
staff is
And
That's
at the same
exactly
time, just to clarify, it's not like you should go out and read a book and like make weird eye contact and like, the thing is, it's like, it's not, you are essentially selling you at that point in the
Exactly.
meeting.
Be
And I think
yourself.
you have to kind of remember that part is like, I'm here already. The part about them liking my writing is done, thank God. That's why
Yes.
I'm in this meeting. So you can get beyond that, and I'd say like whatever it takes for you to relax and sort of, it is a job interview and it is formal and and it is intimidating, but at the same time, like you are selling this product that is you, your voice, and
And you bring something that we need.
Exactly.
Like we're tired. We want you to come in here and write a great script for us and write great stories for us. We want to like you. We are predisposed. So
right
that
on.
should give you a little ease. You don't have to come in and do a whole big tap dance. We like you already. We really want to love you. We want you to take our job so we can go to Vegas.
I think sometimes that people that are trying to break in think that it's sort of a closed society and that we're, they won't let us break through. There's nothing more we would like than to have you break through because you are nothing but help to us.
That's right.
So.
Right, that's really right on. We have time, right? Okay. Yes?
It seems to me that because of the demands and the expectations of networks and audience for quality television, that showrunners seem to be reluctant to hire like staff writers, and they tend to hire more experienced, producer level and up. Can you talk about that trend and also talk about who mentored you and who gave you your first big break?
I don't know that it hasn't been true in my experience. We like to hire. I've always liked to hire at different levels. I don't know. Have you guys?
Yeah, no, on The Shield, I hired 2 staff writers right from the very beginning, and they rose to be executive producers. On the unit last year, we had 2 staff writers. I know what you mean. There's actually, I think, budgetary pressure to hire some of these lower level people
Yeah,
because you can't afford a staff of all supervising producers and above. And,
or you're going to have a very small staff.
And, we've already mentioned, Damon and I both, Carlton Hughes, he gave me my first staff job, and he and John Worth, who worked with him, really mentored me tremendously. And I've tried to take that attitude, that what you were talking about, my expectations for a staff writer, I don't expect them to come in and not make any mistakes. And I feel that part of my job is to point out their mistakes, give them some advice on how to correct them, and put them in position to succeed. Because Carlton and John were certainly patient with me. I mean, if you ever saw Nash Bridges, it was a very breezy show, and my first script had like a 1.5-page monologue from like
About right.
And Carlton and John were like, "This is a little wordy." They could not have been more gentle with me, and so I've tried to take that approach. So I'm not sure I buy the premise that there is pressure for quality, but a lot of shows I know are hiring staff writers and story editors.
Yeah, they're very valuable.
It's tough gigs to
and,
get.
and
And I
it's
hate
cheap
to-
labor. I hate to say it, but that's what you want it.
It's a great deal.
Absolutely, great,
Yes, it
great
is.
deal for the show.
It's a great deal.
Mhm.
And also, I mean, I feel similarly that I was mentored in TV by Marshall Herskowitz and Ed Zwick. Prior to that, my TV experience had been getting fired from Captain Kangaroo after one script. But I hasten to add that it was just a chemical thing where I really belonged with them, and they had insight and could see it, and I was a good fit for them, and I worked my ass off for them, and would do it again in a minute. But I mean, what I'm trying to say is, because of having been mentored, I actually really welcome the idea of meeting younger writers that I feel can give to me. I want to be helped majorly, meaning I want you to actually lay down your life for my show. I don't want that feeling like I'm the one sweating and you're looking very relaxed. I don't ever want to see. I don't ever want to see that younger writer looking really relaxed and really easygoing. That makes me very uncomfortable. Because I'm thinking to myself, I am worried
Yes.
24/7.
This is
I
where the
want
bitterness
everyone
begins.
else to be really worried, or at least to have the decency to look really worried when I'm around. And I just want that feeling, like literally, I think of it that way, that you're going to lay down your life for the show, that you're going to give everything you've got, and in return, I feel like I will hopefully bring out the best in your writing. It's definitely a sacred thing. I mean, I would never do a show where I didn't feel like I didn't have some younger writer, hopefully more than one, who was coming along, who was learning and giving to the show.
Just to, I think there is some legitimacy in that point because, especially now we're going into the 4th season of our show. We're not going to be doing as many episodes next year, so we lost a couple writers and did not replace them because sort of a smaller army moves faster. But I do feel that the staff writer is almost always valuable in the first season of a show, but then those are the writers that you're mentoring, and once you've kind of gone through the process once, and it probably shouldn't be this way, and I feel like a little bit guilty saying this, but to kind of say, like, now that staff writer has actually become a supervising producer, they're my go-to person, like, now to kind of do it all over again. But in Carlton's case, he had already done it with Shawn. I came in the 6th season of that show, and they mentored me all over again as a staff writer. So, I feel like maybe
That's
we
why a
should
lot of-
probably bring one on because it is
Right.
so cost effective, just in the spirit of maybe it's not what's best for the show, but maybe it's the debt that we owe, that was done for us. I mean,
That's why the opportunities are on the new show,
Yeah.
by and large. This is why you want to keep your eye on that production chart, as I'm sure you guys all do who want to be writers. And, and read every script that comes out that you can possibly get your hands on and follow it and be there.
Gotta read that Captain Kangaroo. Is that the one where Mr. Green Jeans takes too many pills?
Yes, exactly. She pissed off Mr. Green Jeans.
And Bunny Rabbit pays the bread.
Someday you'll read it. Yes.
All right, but breaking in stories, like how did you get Nash Bridges? Kind of down the line, if you don't mind.
Real quickly, I had been trying to get work for a few years, and I would go on these meetings, and I couldn't get work, or I didn't get the meetings I wanted to get. And I talked to my manager, Larry Schumann. I said, I'm not getting the meetings I want. Will you show me a spec script of another client of yours that's really getting him or her a lot of meetings, because I want to figure out what it is I'm doing. And he gave me an X-Files script that Tim Minear had written that was getting him a lot of meetings and a lot of work, and Tim's gone on to do some great stuff, and I worked with him on Angel. And I read the script, and what I realized was, this script works from the very first line to the very last line, and every page is so important. And I went and looked at my scripts, and if I was really, really honest with myself, there was a lot to like in those scripts, but it wasn't quite as cohesive as his was. It wasn't quite as polished and professional. And so I determined to myself, I'm going to write a script that will be on that level. And I wrote 2 scripts, a Larry Sanders spec script and a NYPD Blue spec script that I felt really lived up to that. And the moment those 2 scripts got in the marketplace, I started getting more meetings. And it was the Larry Sanders script that got me the Nash Bridges job.
Wow.
That's a very inspirational story.
Yeah.
I like that story.
I got the Nash Bridges job off of a one-act play that I wrote, which was a comedy about time travel. Carlton and John weren't interested in reading. I had written a practice spec and a soprano spec, and they had asked my agents. We were just reading original material, so they responded to that, and that's what got me the meeting, and then the meeting got me the job. So I guess the moral of the story is get a job on Nash Bridges. Exactly. I know it's been canceled for 5 years now.
Actually, just to tell a little war story, Jason Katims had written a 11-page play. He's the brilliant writer that did Friday Night Lights, that created Friday Night Lights, and is still running it. And Ed Zwick was looking for me. I had finally gotten my so-called life on the air, and they were looking for me to have a staff writer, a story editor, and Ed read this play for some reason. Somebody had sent him this play, and there was just something in that 11 pages that felt like a match to our show and to us. And that's like a really nice ending to that story, obviously, because he was a key person for me that whole season, and he went on to be, to just make us all so proud. But I mean, nobody was going, it's a play, oh my gosh, and he hasn't written for TV. People were just responding to what was in those 11 pages.
I have just a slightly different thing, which I started as a writer's assistant. It was my first job on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Deborah Joy Levine was a showrunner, and she went off from there to create a show called Courthouse, which was a very short-lived Patty Wedding. It had a great cast. It wasn't much of a show, but it had a great cast. But I recommend those jobs to you, and I'm very careful when I hire my own assistant, who next year has become a staff writer on Shark, and a writer's assistant. Those are great jobs. They really are worthwhile. I mean, I worked my way up from the bottom up, and I learned a ton. And I tell you, there's not a day when I was running the show for the first time this year where I didn't harken back to lessons I learned when I was a writer's assistant. And working my way up, they're really great. They're a great way in. These guys came in a very hard way to write a cold spec. You haven't been involved, whatever. It's like, I knew my boss. My boss knew me. She hired me based on that. Very, very useful. They're hard jobs to get, but I recommend them highly. If you can stand, all the grunt work that comes with it, but it's worth it.
If you can't get out of the kitchen.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know what? I would have loved to take everyone's questions, but we have to wrap it up. But I have to just say to these gentlemen that it's been very inspirational for me.